I'm Jeff Cook. You can find the tab and chord chart for this lesson using the links below. Today we're looking at beginning to mix lead and rhythm playing. Why is this useful? Okay, if we're playing to an audience and we don't have an accompaniment, a lead guitar solo can easily sound self-indulgent or boring, or may not even seem to make much sense. We may have an idea in our heads of the chord progression that is meant to fit with the solo, but our audience probably won't. However, if we can intersperse the solo with chords placed on the main changes, the audience will be able to hear a proper context for the solo or melody. This is a common technique used in jazz guitar, but it can be easily incorporated into rock or pop music. Even if we're playing with a small band, the same technique can be really useful. For instance, if there isn't a second guitarist or keyboard player, solos can still sound pretty empty when we stop playing rhythm to play lead. But again, a few carefully placed chords help to fill out the sound. Here's a simple example. If I play the melody from the jazz standard Autumn Leaves, it sounds quite empty. And if the listener isn't familiar with the melody, it may not make sense. Okay, so that's fairly empty. It's fairly melodic, but don't forget that when we play most solos, they're not too melodic at all, so they'll make even less sense than this does. However, if we put a couple of chords in here, in between the notes, so that we go like this, I think you can agree that it actually fills it out quite a lot and makes a lot more melodic and harmonic sense. Now we're going to look at the short piece I played at the beginning of the video. The solo for this piece sticks mostly to the major pentatonic scale, but instead of playing the same pentatonic scale throughout, as is often the case with blues progressions, we're going to change the scale as the chords change. This actually helps to outline the chords, so that while we are playing the single notes, we can still hear the chords we're implying. It's a little more difficult, but it definitely helps to make the progression hang together better when there is only a skeleton of a chord structure. Let's look at the chord progression first. Check the chord boxes in the link if you're not sure of the chord shapes. Okay, the chord progression is essentially a fairly standard blues, a 1-4-5 progression in G major, but there are a few additions. In bar 7, for instance, there is a change to the minor tonality with the 4 chord C7 being replaced with a C minor 7. Okay, it's important to notice that this is the one place where the scale is actually minor pentatonic rather than major pentatonic, but we'll look at that later. Okay, additionally in bars 8, 9 and 11 we've added some extra chords to the progression, while the E flat 7 in bar 12 can be considered as a side step as it leads back to the D7 or 5 chord. So it's... Now let's look at the solo. We can make this easier by thinking of the scale which goes with each chord. We actually only have 3 different chord shapes, so we only have to learn 3 scale shapes and then move them around. The box diagrams for the scale shapes are in the links along with the chord shapes. Let's start with the 7th shape, otherwise known as the dominant 7th shape, with its root on the 6th string. For example, this G7 chord. Now this shape applies to G7, A7 and B flat 7 in this particular piece. We're also going to use E with the scale shape, the same scale shape, since it fits quite nicely. Okay, as with all pentatonic scales, there are only 5 notes to think of. The major pentatonic is simply the major scale without the 4th or 7th notes. Here is the pentatonic scale, G major, in 2 octaves. Okay, so that's G to G. This position of the scale is closest to the chord to which it relates, in this case G7. So in theory it ought to be the easiest one to use. But it might not be the best position in terms of expression, musical expression. So we'll split the scale roughly into 2 separate octaves, a lower register and a higher register. Okay, so here's the lower register position, and we're going to use the next position of the pentatonic scale up the neck. This is it. Okay, so that's your lower register scale. Notice how in the actual piece I slide from the A to the B, that there, just to create more interest. Okay, for the higher register, I'm going to stick to the original position that we played first of this G major pentatonic, as that works quite well without moving too far away from the chord. So here's the higher register. Again, in the actual piece, I'm sliding from that A to the B, again to create a bit more interest. Okay, the really important thing to remember here is to learn the shape of the scale and its relationship to the chord. That is, there's the chord. We're sliding up from there, or like that. Once you know that pattern, you can move it freely about the neck. Anywhere you want to go. Okay, now we're going to look at the dominant 7th shape with its root on the 5th string. For instance, C7. Okay, and that's also going to apply to D7 and E flat 7. The good news here is that in the lower register of the shape, the scale here is identical to the shape of the first scale, except that all the notes are moved down 1 string. So here's a scale related to C7. Go back to G7. So it's the same shape moved across. Here's the upper register. Okay, now that's slightly different from the upper register of the 6th string shape. So watch out for that one. Finally, here is the minor pentatonic, which only appears in bar 6 over the C minor 7 chord. Once again, I'm playing the scale 1 position above the chord so that I can slide into the minor 3rd note. Okay, and now we're going to play the whole thing. Okay, so that's the first chord with the lower register and upper register, and then C7 with the upper register only, back to the first one, couple of double stops, minor 7, remembering what you're really looking for is to know the scale and its relationship to the chord. And the next one. Okay, you can do many things with this. We don't have to stick to what's written. We're trying to learn the scale shapes and not a particular note pattern. Well, I hope you found that useful. It's worth bearing in mind that you don't have to play or even like the blues in order to find a use for this technique. The ultimate aim is to be able to play chords and melodies and solo lines as an almost seamless whole. A fine example of this is the introduction to Little Wing by Jimi Hendrix. Let me show you. Okay, my interpretation isn't a patch on the original, of course, but I hope you see from this how expressive the technique can become. All right, see you next time.